The first thing I heard was the sound of my husband's glass tapping against crystal. Sharp, repetitive, demanding silence. 200 guests turned toward him at once, the chandeliers of the Lakeshore Grand Ballroom trembling with reflected light. It was supposed to be our 40th anniversary celebration, held on a warm October evening in Charleston, South Carolina, surrounded by people who had watched our lives unfold for decades. Instead, it became the night my entire life cracked open. My wife, Harold Whitcomb, said, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes, has served her purpose. And tonight, I am officially filing for divorce. The room didn't gasp all at once. It exhaled slowly, like a stunned animal. I remember the exact sensation in my body. My fingers went cold first, then my knees softened beneath the weight of his words. I could feel the silk of my burgundy dress clinging damply to my back, though the ballroom air conditioning hummed steadily overhead. 40 years of marriage reduced to a performance. My attorney is here. Harold continued, lifting his chin. Papers have already been signed. Assets transferred. My wife agreed months ago. She just didn't bother reading carefully. People turned toward me, some pitying, some curious, some hungry for drama. I stood frozen beside the cake shaped like our old beach house in Hilton Head, staring at the man I had built a life with, the man whose company I had helped grow from a 2-room insurance office into Whitcomb Risk Solutions, now worth millions. He looked at me as though I were a piece of furniture he was finally discarding. And that's when I understood something crucial. He thought I was weak. He thought I didn't know. He thought this humiliation would break me in front of witnesses so thoroughly that I would never fight back. What Harold did not know was this. 3 months earlier, I had already started preparing for war. My name is Lorraine Caldwell Whitcomb. I am 63 years old. And that night, standing under the chandeliers, while strangers whispered about betrayal and family drama, I made a quiet promise to myself. He would regret this spectacle, not quickly, not loudly, but completely. Because humiliation, when swallowed, instead of spat out, ferments into something far more dangerous. Revenge. The open loop began 3 months before that night, in the most ordinary way imaginable. It was a Tuesday morning. I was folding laundry in our historic Charleston mansion when I found an unfamiliar receipt tucked into Harold's suit jacket. A private investigator invoice. Paid in full. My hands shook as I read the client name. Harold Whitcomb, subject under investigation. Lorraine Whitcomb. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, heart hammering, realizing my husband had been secretly surveilling me. Why? I had done nothing wrong. Or so I thought. That afternoon, I visited an old friend from church, Eleanor Briggs, who happened to be a retired corporate attorney. She poured tea into china cups and listened quietly while I slid the receipt across her kitchen table. Her expression shifted from concern to something colder. Lorraine, she said carefully, this isn't about infidelity. This looks like pre-divorce asset positioning. My stomach dropped. Meaning, she said, lowering her voice. He's building a case to claim you're financially incompetent or legally negligent. That way, he can shift company ownership without a major settlement. The words landed like stones. 40 years of partnership reduced to a strategy memo. Eleanor leaned closer. If he's investigating you, he's already planning an exit. And Lorraine, men like Harold don't leave quietly. They leave after securing everything. That night, I didn't confront him. I smiled, cooked dinner, asked about his day, and I began, quietly, copying documents. Company filings, trust amendments, property transfers. Over the next weeks, I discovered something far worse than betrayal. Harold had secretly amended our estate plan. The Whitcomb Foundation, the company shares, even our Charleston mansion, had been redirected into a new will, one that excluded me entirely. Not reduced, not limited, excluded. The primary beneficiary listed was a name I had never seen before. Camilla Royce, 32 years old, listed as executive consultant at Whitcomb Risk Solutions. But what froze my blood was the handwritten note attached to the draft. Future spouse designation, pending divorce completion. The moment I read that line, something inside me hardened into steel. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did something much more dangerous. I called Eleanor again, and I said 3 words that changed everything. Let's prepare. Because when Harold stood under those ballroom lights, months later declaring his victory, he believed the story was already over. He didn't realize he had only just stepped onto the battlefield. And he certainly didn't know about the one document I had discovered that could destroy him completely. A document hidden in the company's earliest files. One he had forgotten existed. One that legally made everything he claimed to own mine. But I couldn't reveal it yet. Not until he finished digging his own grave. And that night, as the guests whispered, and Harold handed me a divorce envelope with a triumphant smile, I did exactly what he expected. I lowered my eyes. I accepted the papers, and I whispered softly, just loud enough for him to hear. Thank you. His smile faltered for a split second. He thought I was defeated. He didn't realize I was just getting started. Harold never noticed the moment his control slipped. It happened right there in the ballroom. Though he would only understand it months later, sitting in a courtroom while a judge read out evidence he never imagined I possessed. But that night, as guests circled like vultures around scandal, he mistook silence for surrender. He had always done that. For 40 years, I had been the calm one, the accommodating one, the wife who smoothed over his temper and quietly handled the details of his empire. He believed I was harmless, and that belief became his greatest vulnerability. Lorraine, he said softly, leaning toward me after handing over the divorce envelope, don't make a scene. It would only embarrass you further. Embarrass me further. The words echoed inside my skull. I could hear crystal glasses clinking nearby. The faint scent of champagne and roasted salmon hung heavy in the air. Someone's heels clicked across marble flooring. The world kept moving, while mine narrowed to a single, chilling clarity. He wanted public humiliation to establish dominance, to frame me as the discarded, irrelevant wife in a family drama he could control. So I gave him what he wanted. I nodded. I even forced a small smile. You've always been decisive, Harold, I said evenly. That seemed to relax him. He didn't notice Eleanor Briggs standing across the ballroom, watching everything with a calculating expression. He didn't notice my son's wife, Natalie, whispering sharply into her phone. And most importantly, he didn't notice Camilla Royce stepping into the ballroom 15 minutes later. The woman who thought she had already replaced me. She was younger than I expected. Tall, with sleek, dark hair, and the kind of polished confidence that comes from believing you've already won. She wore a silver dress that caught the light like shards of ice. Harold greeted her with a warmth he hadn't shown me in years. Guests saw it. Whispers spread instantly. Betrayal, affair, manipulation. The words didn't need to be spoken aloud. Camilla glanced at me briefly. Her smile was polite, almost sympathetic, as if I were already erased. What she didn't know was this. 3 weeks earlier, I had met her privately, not as a rival, as an investigator. I had invited her to lunch under the pretense of discussing a retirement transition at the company. She arrived expecting a simple corporate conversation. Instead, I asked one quiet question. Do you know about the inheritance clause tied to Harold's original partnership contract? Her confusion was genuine. Harold told me he built the company alone, she said. I remember stirring my tea, slowly watching her expression shift as I slid a document across the table. The original founding agreement of Whitcomb Risk Solutions, signed 42 years earlier, between Harold Whitcomb and Lorraine Caldwell. 50% ownership, permanent, irrevocable. But more importantly, there was a clause buried deep within the contract. A clause Harold had clearly forgotten. If one partner attempted to secretly transfer company shares without the other's written consent, full ownership would automatically revert to the non-breaching partner, meaning everything Harold had tried to move into his new will legally snapped back to me, including the mansion, the foundation, every company asset. Camilla's face had gone pale when she realized the implications. "He told me you signed everything," she whispered. "I did," I replied calmly, "but not the only document that matters." That day, I didn't threaten her. I didn't accuse her. I simply let her see the truth. She wasn't inheriting a future. She was walking into a legal disaster. And when she left the restaurant, I knew one thing for certain. She would not remain loyal to Harold once the reality surfaced. Which is why, standing in the ballroom that night, I wasn't watching Harold. I was watching her. Because the moment Harold raised his glass again and proudly announced that Camilla would soon become both his wife and the new executive director of Whitcomb Risk Solutions, I saw it. The exact second she realized he had lied to her too. Her smile froze. Her eyes flickered toward me. And in that silent exchange across a crowded ballroom, we both understood something terrifyingly simple. Harold wasn't just betraying me. He was betraying everyone, including the woman he thought was his future. That was the moment the battlefield truly shifted. Because from that night forward, Harold would not be facing one opponent. He would be facing two. And he still had no idea that the greatest threat wasn't the divorce. It was the criminal audit Eleanor had quietly initiated. An audit that was about to uncover something far worse than infidelity or asset manipulation. Something that could send Harold Whitcomb to prison. But the most shocking twist hadn't even surfaced yet. Because buried in those financial records was a secret tied to our own family. A hidden truth involving my son. One that would force me to make the most devastating decision of my life. The first time I suspected my son was involved, I refused to believe it. A mother's instinct is strange that way. It protects hope even when evidence begins to pile up like storm clouds on the horizon. 2 days after the anniversary humiliation, I sat in Eleanor Briggs's office overlooking Charleston Harbor. The November sky outside was gray, the water churning under sharp wind. Inside the room smelled faintly of leather and old paper. Eleanor slid a thick folder toward me. "This," she said quietly, "is the preliminary forensic audit of Whitcomb Risk Solutions." My stomach tightened. I had expected evidence of Harold shifting assets, manipulating company valuations, maybe hiding income streams. I was not prepared for what I saw. Numbers circled in red ink, unexplained transfers, consulting fees routed through shell corporations. Over 6 years, more than $12 million had been quietly siphoned from company accounts. I stared at the figures until they blurred. "That's not just financial manipulation," I whispered. "That's embezzlement." Eleanor nodded. "And worse," she added, tapping another section. "These transfers were authorized through a secondary executive signature." My throat went dry. "Harold?" "No," she said. She turned the page, and there it was, the digital authorization stamp. Nathan Whitcomb, my son. I remember gripping the edge of the desk to keep from sliding off the chair. The room seemed to tilt. Nathan was 40 years old, our only child, the boy who used to fall asleep on Harold's office couch while we worked late, building the company together. The boy who used to say, "One day I'll take care of both of you." I heard my own voice shaking. "There has to be a mistake." Eleanor's expression softened, but she did not lie. "He's listed as chief financial officer," she said gently. These approvals required his credentials. I shook my head, slowly, disbelief pressing against my ribs. Nathan would never steal from his own family, unless he believed the company no longer belonged to me. Unless Harold had convinced him I was already excluded. The realization struck like ice water. Harold hadn't just been planning a divorce. He had been rewriting the family narrative, painting me as irrelevant, financially incompetent, an obstacle to the future he promised Nathan. And Nathan, trusting his father, had likely believed it. My chest tightened with a pain far worse than betrayal from a husband. This was the fracture of something deeper. Trust between mother and child. Eleanor spoke quietly. Lorraine, the transfers route, through a holding company called Royce Strategic Consulting. The name landed like a stone. Camilla. Of course, the supposed executive consultant, the future spouse, the woman Harold claimed was his new partner in business and life. The puzzle snapped into place with brutal clarity. Harold hadn't just been planning to leave me. He had been building an entirely new power structure. Himself, Camilla, and Nathan. A new family, one that excluded me, not just emotionally, but financially and legally. My hands trembled. Not from weakness, from rage. But beneath the rage was something far more painful, a quiet grief. Because I realized something devastating. Nathan hadn't betrayed me out of cruelty. He had been manipulated. And manipulation leaves scars deeper than deliberate malice. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly. What happens now? I asked. Eleanor's voice remained steady. We wait. We continue gathering evidence. If we move too early, they'll destroy records. She paused. But Lorraine, there's something else. She opened another file. Inside was a copy of a recent trust amendment, signed by Harold, witnessed by Nathan. The document stated that after the divorce finalized, Harold intended to transfer controlling company shares to Nathan and Camilla jointly. I felt my heart crack open, not because of the money, but because of what it meant. My son had stood beside his father and watched him legally erase me, and he had signed anyway. Tears finally burned my eyes. Not falling, just hovering. Eleanor leaned forward. You need to decide something, she said quietly. Are you fighting to destroy them or to save your son? The question pierced deeper than any legal strategy. Because revenge against a husband was one thing, but justice involving your own child, that required a different kind of strength. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked out the window at the restless water, and for the first time since the ballroom, humiliation fear crept into my chest. Not fear of losing everything, but fear of what I might have to do to expose the truth. Because I already knew something, Eleanor did not. Nathan hadn't just been approving transfers. He had unknowingly authorized one transaction that crossed a legal line so severe it could bring federal charges. A transfer tied to a client account under government investigation. Money that wasn't just stolen, money that was illegal to move. And once authorities discovered that, there would be no quiet resolution, only destruction. The question wasn't whether Harold's empire would collapse. It was whether my son would collapse with it. The hardest part of revenge is not the planning. It's the waiting. The weeks after the anniversary disaster stretched like a slow-burning fuse. Charleston moved toward the holidays with cheerful indifference, storefronts glowing with Christmas lights, while my life quietly unraveled beneath the surface. I played my role carefully. Publicly, I appeared defeated. I moved out of the mansion into a modest waterfront condo. I stopped attending charity events. I let gossip spread that I had been completely excluded from Harold's will and inheritance. Exactly what he wanted people to believe. Exactly what I needed. Because arrogance thrives on perceived victory. And Harold had become dangerously arrogant. One evening in early December, I received the call that changed everything. It came from an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Whitcomb, a male voice said. Yes, this is Daniel Mercer from the Federal Financial Crimes Unit. We need to speak with you regarding Whitcomb Risk Solutions. My pulse slowed instead of racing. I had expected this moment. I've been waiting for your call, I replied quietly. There was a pause. Then he said carefully, Ma'am, most people don't say that. I almost smiled. You don't understand, I said. This investigation may save my son's life. 3 days later, I sat in a federal office building in downtown Charleston. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The air smelled sterile, like disinfectant and paper. 2 agents reviewed the audit documents Eleanor had helped me prepare. Agent Mercer looked up. "Mrs. Whitcomb, these transfers involve federal insurance escrow accounts. Misusing them constitutes criminal fraud." "I know," I said. "Your husband appears to be the primary architect." "Yes, and your son authorized the transactions." The words hit like a hammer, even though I had rehearsed hearing them. I folded my hands tightly. "He didn't understand what he was signing," I said. Mercer's gaze softened slightly. "Intent matters," he acknowledged. "But legally, authorization still creates liability." Liability, such a cold word for something that could destroy a life. I swallowed hard. "What happens next?" "We continue building the case," he said. "But we'll need cooperation from someone inside the company." I didn't hesitate. "You already have it," he frowned. "Who?" I held his gaze. "Camilla Royce." 2 weeks earlier, after the anniversary night, Camilla had come to see me privately. She arrived trembling. Not from guilt, from fear. "He lied to me," she whispered the moment she sat down. "About everything. The ownership, the inheritance, the legal exposure." I watched her carefully, and now I asked. "He wants me to sign additional transfers," she said. "He says it's routine restructuring." Her eyes filled with panic. "I think he's trying to make me the fall person." That was the moment I knew. The battlefield had shifted completely. Harold's greatest weakness wasn't his greed. It was his belief that he controlled everyone around him. He had underestimated Camilla's survival instinct, and he had underestimated mine. So I made her an offer. Not revenge, protection. "If you cooperate," I told her quietly, "you won't go to prison, but you must tell the truth." She stared at me. "Even if it destroys him." I held her gaze steadily. He destroyed himself. And now, sitting in the federal office weeks later, I knew the final stage had begun. Agent Mercer closed the file. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said, "once we move forward, there's no stopping this process. I understand. You may lose your family entirely." I felt the weight of those words settle over me. Because revenge against betrayal always comes at a cost. Sometimes the cost is loneliness. Sometimes it is grief. And sometimes it is watching the people you love face consequences you cannot shield them from. I stood slowly. "For 40 years, I said quietly, I protected my family by staying silent." I met his eyes. "This time, I protect them by telling the truth." As I walked out of the building into the cold December air, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not triumph, something quieter, acceptance. Because the next time I saw Harold Whitcomb would not be in a ballroom. It would be in a courtroom. And by then, the one thing he feared most would no longer be hidden. The truth about who actually owned everything he thought he controlled. And the truth about who had been quietly building the case that would end his empire. Me. The morning the investigation became public, Charleston woke up to rain. Cold, steady rain that blurred the city's pastel facades and washed fallen magnolia leaves into the gutters. I stood at the window of my condo, watching droplets trail down the glass like slow tears. For weeks I had lived inside silence, careful silence, strategic silence. Now that silence was about to shatter. My phone rang at exactly 8:15. Eleanor's name lit the screen. "It's happening," she said without preamble. My chest tightened. "They've executed the subpoenas. Federal agents are inside Whitcomb Risk Solutions right now." I closed my eyes briefly. 40 years of building that company. 40 years of late nights, sacrifices, and dreams. Now it was being dismantled, piece by piece, under fluorescent lights and legal authority. "Harold," I asked quietly. "He's there," Eleanor replied. "And Lorraine, he's furious. He keeps demanding to know who initiated the investigation." I let out a slow breath. "He still thinks he's in control." "For the moment," she said. I could hear papers shuffling on her end. "There's something else. Nathan is with him. That name struck like a physical blow. Even now, weeks after discovering his involvement, the pain hadn't dulled. It had only changed shape. More complicated, less sharp, but heavier. "What's he doing?" I asked. "Arguing," she said. "Witnesses say he looks shocked, like he didn't know the extent of what was happening." I pressed my palm against the cool window. Rain blurred the city skyline into gray streaks. Nathan had believed his father. He had believed the narrative Harold created, that I was stepping aside, that the transfers were routine, that everything was legal. Manipulation works best when wrapped in trust, and Harold had spent decades cultivating that trust. The phone buzzed again before I could respond. A second call from Nathan. My heart lurched. For a moment, I couldn't move. I hadn't spoken to him since the anniversary night, since he stood across the ballroom, avoiding my eyes, since he chose silence over defending me. Eleanor's voice softened. "You don't have to answer." But I knew I did, because revenge was never my ultimate goal. Truth was, and truth requires confrontation. I ended the call with Eleanor and answered. Mom, Nathan's voice sounded raw, strained. Just hearing him say that word nearly broke me. "Yes," I said quietly. There was a long pause. Then he spoke in a rush. "Federal agents are here. They're talking about fraud, about illegal transfers. Dad says it's a misunderstanding, but, Mom, I saw the documents." His breathing hitched. "I signed those authorizations. I didn't know they were illegal." My eyes burned. "I know," I whispered. Silence stretched between us, heavy, fragile. Then his voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" That question cut deeper than any accusation, because the answer was painfully simple. "You wouldn't have believed me," I said softly. He didn't argue, because we both knew it was true. For years, Harold's influence had shaped his perceptions. I heard him swallow hard. "Is this why you left? Why you didn't fight the divorce?" "Yes." Another pause. Longer this time. "Mom," he said finally, voice trembling, "am I going to prison?" The question shattered something inside my chest. I leaned my forehead against the glass. Rain tapped softly against the window. "You cooperated unknowingly," I said carefully. "Intent matters, but you need to tell the truth now. Completely." "And Dad?" I closed my eyes. This was the moment every mother dreads. Being forced to choose between protecting a child and shielding a spouse. "He made his choices," I said quietly. Nathan's voice dropped to a whisper. "He told me you abandoned the company years ago, that you didn't care about the finances anymore. He said he was protecting the family legacy." Tears finally slipped down my cheeks, because that was Harold's greatest betrayal. Not the affair, not the inheritance manipulation, but rewriting our shared history to erase me from it. "I never abandoned anything," I whispered. Nathan exhaled shakily. "I think I know that now." Those words carried both apology and heartbreak, and they marked the first crack in Harold's carefully constructed narrative. Before we hung up, Nathan said something that froze my breath. "There's something else, Mom. Something Dad never wanted anyone to see." My pulse quickened. "What?" "A private account," he said. "Not tied to company funds. It's labeled under a trust name I've never heard before." "What trust?" His voice dropped. "The Royce Family Legacy Trust." The name struck like lightning. Royce, Camilla's surname. But why would Harold have a separate trust tied to her family? And more importantly, what was hidden inside it? Because I knew one thing instantly. Whatever was in that account was something Harold had kept secret from everyone, even from the woman he claimed to love. And secrets that deep are never harmless. I met Camilla Royce 3 nights later. Not in a restaurant this time. Not in a polite, controlled setting, but in the parking garage beneath a federal courthouse, where concrete pillars cast long shadows under flickering fluorescent lights. She looked different. Not polished. Not confident. Fear strips away illusions quickly. Her coat hung loosely around her shoulders, and dark circles framed her eyes. "I didn't want to be seen entering your condo," she said quietly. "I understand," I replied. The air smelled faintly of oil and damp concrete. Cars echoed in the distance. She hesitated before speaking. "Harold thinks I'm still loyal to him," she said. "He's planning to move assets again. He keeps talking about protecting something he calls his real legacy." My stomach tightened. "The Royce Family Legacy Trust," I said. Her eyes widened. "You know about it." "My son mentioned it," I replied. "What is it?" She swallowed. "It's not a financial trust. At least, not entirely." A cold feeling crept along my spine. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then pulled a folded document from her purse. "This," she said, handing it to me. I opened it slowly. At first glance, it looked like an old legal agreement, dated nearly 40 years earlier. My breath caught as I read the names. Harold Whitcomb, Daniel Royce, Camilla's father. The document outlined a private investment partnership formed decades ago. But what froze me wasn't the business arrangement. It was the clause at the bottom. In the event of death or legal incapacity of either partner, full control of shared assets would transfer to the surviving partner's designated heir. Camilla's hands trembled slightly. "My father died suddenly when I was a child," she said. "Harold became trustee of everything." A wave of realization hit me, meaning he's been controlling your inheritance all these years. She nodded slowly. "He told me it was lost during market crashes, that there was nothing left." I felt anger surge through my veins. Harold hadn't just manipulated his wife and son. He had been exploiting Camilla since she was a child, keeping her inheritance hidden, grooming her dependents, positioning himself as her protector, and now preparing to marry her while secretly holding control over her family's wealth. It was beyond betrayal. It was predatory. Camilla's voice dropped. "I accessed the trust account yesterday." My heart pounded. "How much?" Her eyes filled with stunned disbelief. $38 million. The number echoed in the concrete space like a gunshot. For a moment, neither of us spoke, because that amount explained everything. Harold's obsession with control, his willingness to destroy decades of family ties, his ruthless attempt to eliminate me legally. He hadn't just been planning a new life. He had been consolidating two fortunes, mine and Camilla's, all under his sole authority. I looked up slowly. "He was never going to marry you as an equal," I said quietly. Her lips trembled. "I know that now." She wiped a tear quickly. "I gave the trust records to the federal agents this morning." My breath caught. "That changes everything I said." She nodded. "They said it proves long-term financial fraud, not just corporate misconduct, personal exploitation." I felt something settle deep inside me. Not satisfaction, something heavier. Justice. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about exposing decades of hidden manipulation. Camilla looked at me carefully. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. The question lingered between us. I answered honestly. "Because we were both deceived by the same man," I said. "And because no one should have their life rewritten without their consent." She studied me for a long moment. Then she whispered something that made my heart stop. "There's one more secret." My pulse quickened. "What secret?" She hesitated, then said softly, "Harold isn't just hiding money." Her voice trembled. "He's been hiding a crime connected to your family. Something that happened decades ago." A chill spread through my chest. "What crime?" She met my eyes. "The night your sister died." The world seemed to tilt, because that night had always been ruled an accident. A tragic car crash, something buried in grief and silence. But now it sounded like it might have been something else entirely. And if Harold had been involved, then the truth I was about to uncover would destroy far more than his empire. It would destroy the last illusions I had left about the man I once loved. For more than 30 years, I had lived with a memory that never settled. It returned at odd moments, in the middle of quiet afternoons, in the stillness before sleep, in the sound of tires hissing on wet pavement. The night my younger sister, Amelia Caldwell, died. She was 24, bright, reckless, full of plans that stretched far beyond the small South Carolina town where we grew up, and she adored Harold. That had always bothered me, though I never admitted it aloud. She admired him the way younger sisters sometimes admire older siblings' partners. She saw his ambition as strength, his confidence as protection. I saw something else even back then. Control. The night she died, it had been raining heavily. She left a dinner party early, saying she felt unwell. Less than an hour later, police called. Single car crash, loss of control. Vehicle skidded into a guardrail. They called it tragic. They called it accidental. I had believed them, until now, standing in that dim parking garage, with Camilla hearing her say those words, I felt something inside my chest fracture open. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely steady. She swallowed. Harold keeps old records, she said. Everything, even things he should have destroyed. My heart pounded painfully. He had a locked cabinet in his private office. I accessed it during the federal search. She pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a yellowed document, a police report dated the night Amelia died. I scanned the page, breath shallow. It listed something that had never been mentioned to me. Witness statement. A passing driver reported seeing another vehicle near Amelia's car just before the crash. A dark sedan, registered to Whitcomb Risk Solutions. My hands began to tremble. No, I whispered. Camilla's voice was gentle, but firm. There's more. She handed me a second document, a toxicology analysis. My vision blurred as I read. Amelia had alcohol in her system, but also traces of a sedative, one not prescribed to her. The report had been marked inconclusive. No further investigation pursued. I staggered back slightly, pressing my hand against a concrete pillar. Memories surged violently. Harold insisting that night that Amelia shouldn't drive. Harold offering to make sure she got home safely. Harold returning hours later, soaked from rain, claiming he had been searching for her when he heard about the crash. I had trusted him completely. I looked up at Camilla, my voice shaking. Are you saying he drugged her? I don't know, she said quietly, but the records suggest he was near her vehicle shortly before the accident. A cold fury rose inside me. Not loud, not explosive, just deep and absolute. Because if Harold had caused Amelia's death, then every year I had spent beside him, every moment of loyalty, had been built on a lie far darker than betrayal. I forced myself to breathe. Why would he do that? I asked. Camilla hesitated. Because of inheritance. The word landed heavily. Amelia was your parents' primary heir, wasn't she? My stomach twisted. Yes, I whispered. Our parents had died shortly after her. Their estate had passed to me by default because she was gone. Money Harold had used to expand his first insurance office. Money that became the foundation of everything he built. Everything. A horrifying realization settled into place. If she had lived, I whispered, he never would have had access to that inheritance. Camilla nodded slowly, and he knew it. Silence filled the garage. Heavy, unbearable. For the first time in this entire ordeal, my hands began to shake uncontrollably. Not from fear, from grief. Because revenge against betrayal is one thing, but discovering that the man you loved may have destroyed your sister's life for financial gain, that is something else entirely. I pressed my palm against my mouth, trying to steady my breathing. How long did he keep this hidden? I asked. Decades, Camilla said softly. And Lorraine, there's one more piece. She handed me a small cassette tape, an old micro recorder, label faded, but still readable. Amelia. My pulse roared in my ears. What is this? I think Camilla whispered, it's the last message she ever recorded. The world seemed to narrow to that tiny object in my hand. Because if Amelia had left evidence, if she had known she was in danger, then everything I believed about that night was about to collapse completely. And the truth inside that recording could destroy Harold Whitcomb far more thoroughly than any financial crime. I didn't listen to the tape immediately. I couldn't. Some truths require preparation before they can be faced. That night, I sat alone in my condo living room, the cassette resting on the coffee table in front of me. Christmas lights flickered softly outside along the waterfront, their reflections rippling across dark water. The quiet felt heavy, almost sacred, because I knew, once I pressed play, there would be no returning to the life I thought I had lived. I poured a glass of water. My hands trembled slightly. Then I inserted the tape into an old recorder Eleanor had found in storage. The click sounded unnaturally loud. A hiss of static filled the room. Then, a voice, soft, familiar. "Lori, if you're hearing this, something went wrong." My breath hitched violently. Amelia. Her voice carried the same warmth I remembered, the same gentle lilt. Tears blurred my vision instantly. "I don't know how to tell you this in person." The recording continued, "because I'm afraid you wouldn't believe me." My chest tightened painfully. "It's Harold," she whispered. The words struck like a physical blow. "He's been pressuring me to sign over my inheritance early. He says it's for investment opportunities. But something feels wrong." I clutched the armrest of my chair. "He gave me a drink tonight." Amelia's voice continued slightly slurred. "I feel dizzy. I think he put something in it." My heart pounded so hard it hurt. "If anything happens to me," she whispered, "please don't trust him. He isn't who he pretends to be." The recording ended abruptly, just static. I sat frozen. The room seemed impossibly quiet. Everything inside me felt hollow, because in that moment, the final illusion shattered. Harold hadn't just betrayed me. He hadn't just manipulated our son. He hadn't just exploited Camilla. He had destroyed my sister's life deliberately. For money, for control, for ambition. A sound escaped my throat, half sob, half breath. And for the first time since this ordeal began, I let myself cry fully. Not polite tears, not controlled grief, but deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere buried for decades. I cried for Amelia, for the years of misplaced trust, for the life I had built beside a man capable of such cruelty. When the tears finally subsided, something else replaced them. Not rage, not even hatred, something colder. Clarity, because now this was no longer about divorce, or inheritance, or revenge. This was about justice, for a crime, buried for more than 30 years. I wiped my face slowly and reached for my phone. There was only one person I needed to call. Agent Mercer. He answered immediately. "Mrs. Whitcomb." My voice was steady. "I have new evidence," I said quietly. "Evidence connected to a death that was never properly investigated." He paused. "What kind of death?" I stared at the recorder, at the tape that held my sister's final words. "My sister's," I said. Silence filled the line. Then his voice changed, more serious. "Bring everything you have." I ended the call and sat still for a moment. Outside, Christmas lights shimmered on the water. Peaceful, beautiful, a stark contrast to the storm gathering beneath the surface of my life. Because once authorities heard that recording, Harold Whitcomb wouldn't just face financial charges. He would face a reopened homicide investigation. And this time, he wouldn't be able to control the narrative. He wouldn't be able to manipulate witnesses. He wouldn't be able to rewrite history. Because the truth had been waiting patiently for decades. And now finally, it was ready to be heard. The day they arrested Harold Whitcomb began with sunlight. Bright, almost painfully clear sunlight. It felt wrong somehow, as if the world should have been cloaked in storm clouds to match the weight of what was about to happen. Instead, Charleston woke to a crisp winter morning, blue sky stretching endlessly above the harbor. I was sitting at my kitchen table when Agent Mercer called. "They've issued the warrant," he said. My hands tightened around my coffee mug. "For the financial charges?" I asked quietly. "For those," he replied, "and for a reopened investigation into the death of Amelia Caldwell." The words landed heavily, even though I had expected them. Hearing them spoken aloud made everything real in a way that documents never could. "Where is he now?" I asked. "In his office," Mercer said. "He doesn't know yet." I closed my eyes briefly. For decades, Harold had believed himself untouchable, respected businessman, community donor, family patriarch, the kind of man people assumed could never do something truly monstrous. That illusion was about to end. "Do you want to be present?" Mercer asked carefully. The question surprised me. My first instinct was to say no, to stay far away from that moment. But then I remembered Amelia's voice on the tape, the quiet fear, the warning she left for me, and I realized something. This wasn't just about watching justice unfold. It was about reclaiming truth that had been stolen for 30 years. "Yes," I said. "I'll be there." An hour later, I stood across the street from Whitcomb Risk Solutions. The building looked exactly as it always had. Tall glass windows reflecting the winter sky. The polished brass company name gleaming beside the entrance. It was strange to realize how much of my life had been contained inside those walls. How many nights I had stayed late balancing accounts while Harold charmed clients. How many times Nathan had run through those hallways as a child, laughing. Now federal vehicles lined the curb. Agents moved with quiet efficiency. There was no chaos, no shouting, just the steady, controlled presence of authority. I spotted Nathan near the entrance. He looked exhausted, older than his 40 years. When he saw me, his shoulders sagged slightly, relief flickering across his face. "Mom," he said, his voice low. I stepped closer. He hesitated before speaking again. I told them everything he whispered, about the transfers, about what Dad told me. I touched his arm gently. That was the right choice. His eyes filled with guilt. "I should have listened to you sooner." I shook my head slowly. "You were manipulated," I said softly. "That's not the same as betrayal." The words felt important, because forgiveness isn't always about absolving actions. Sometimes it's about understanding the forces that shaped them. Before he could respond, movement at the building entrance drew our attention. 2 agents walked out, Harold between them. For a moment, I barely recognized him. His posture, once so commanding, had collapsed inward. His face was pale jaw clenched tightly, but his eyes still searched the crowd with the same calculating intensity. Then he saw me. Time seemed to stop. Across the distance between us, we looked at each other for the first time since the anniversary night. No ballroom lights, no audience, just truth. His expression shifted rapidly. Shock. Rage. Then something colder. Realization. He knew. He knew I had been the one who uncovered everything. He took a step forward, despite the agent's grip. "You did this," he said hoarsely. His voice carried across the quiet street. I met his gaze steadily. "No," I replied calmly. "You did this." The words settled into the air, like a final verdict. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not guilt, not remorse, but something closer to fear. Because he understood now. Not just that he was facing prison, but that the narrative he had controlled for decades had completely collapsed. He opened his mouth as if to speak again, then stopped because he saw Nathan standing beside me. And in that instant, he understood something even more devastating. He had lost his son's loyalty. Completely. The agents led him toward the vehicle. He didn't look back again. As the door closed, I felt a strange stillness settle inside me. Not triumph, not relief, just a quiet sense of finality. Because justice doesn't feel like victory. It feels like the end of a long, painful truth, finally acknowledged. Nathan stood beside me silently. After a moment, he spoke. "Is it over now?" I looked at the courthouse, rising in the distance. "No," I said quietly. "This is only the beginning. Because trials take time, and the next stage would force all of us to confront not just legal consequences, but emotional ones, ones that no court could fully resolve." The courtroom felt colder than I expected. Not physically cold, but emotionally sterile, like a place designed to strip away illusion and leave only facts. I sat in the front row on the first day of Harold's trial. Nathan sat beside me. Camilla sat on my other side. It was a strange alignment. 3 people who had once been bound to Harold in completely different ways. Now, united by the truth he tried to bury. Harold sat at the defense table, wearing a gray suit that looked looser on him than I remembered. He didn't look at us. Not once. The prosecutor's voice echoed clearly as she laid out the charges. Financial fraud, embezzlement, long-term asset manipulation, and finally, reckless endangerment resulting in death. Hearing those words spoken publicly sent a chill through me. For 30 years, Amelia's death had existed only as private grief. Now it stood under harsh courtroom lights, examined, questioned, acknowledged. The prosecutor called the first witness, Agent Mercer. He explained the financial investigation, calmly presenting evidence of illegal transfers and trust exploitation. Harold's attorney tried to frame it as accounting errors, miscommunication, corporate complexity, but the paper trail was undeniable. Each document tightened the net. Then came the most difficult moment, the tape. The courtroom fell silent as the recording played. Amelia's voice filled the space, soft, frightened, trusting me even in her final moments. I felt Nathan's hand tighten around mine. Across the room, I saw Harold's face finally crack. For the first time, he looked truly shaken, because that recording removed his greatest weapon, plausible deniability. When the tape ended, the silence felt heavy enough to crush breath. The prosecutor spoke quietly. This recording demonstrates that the defendant had motive, opportunity, and intent to obtain financial control through coercion and chemical impairment. Harold's attorney objected immediately, but the judge allowed the evidence, and in that moment, the case shifted irreversibly. I watched Harold closely. For decades, he had mastered emotional control. But now he looked smaller, not physically, but in presence, because power built on lies collapses quickly once exposed. During a recess, Nathan turned to me. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to process this," he said. I squeezed his hand gently. "You don't have to process everything at once," I replied. "Just focus on what's true now." He nodded slowly. Camilla spoke quietly from my other side. "He's trying to avoid looking at us," she said. I followed her gaze. She was right. Harold's eyes remained fixed on the table in front of him, as if acknowledging us would force him to confront the human cost of his actions. The judge called the session back to order, and as testimony continued, I felt something shift inside me. For months, I had carried anger, grief, a need for justice. Now those emotions began to settle into something quieter, acceptance, because the truth was no longer hidden. It was no longer mine alone to carry. It belonged to the world now, to the court, to history. As the day ended and the judge adjourned proceedings, I stood slowly. Walking toward the exit, I realized something unexpected. Revenge had never been my destination. Reclamation had, reclaiming my voice, my history, my sister's truth, and the right to live without being defined by someone else's betrayal. Outside the courthouse, winter sunlight glowed softly across the steps. Nathan walked beside me. "Mom," he said quietly, "what happens after this is over?" I paused, looking out toward the harbor. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel bound to the past. "I start a new life," I said simply. He nodded. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something return to his expression. Hope. But deep down, I knew one final chapter still remained. Because justice in courtrooms is only one kind of ending. The true ending comes later. In the quiet moments, when you finally decide who you are after everything has been taken apart. And I was only just beginning to discover that answer. The verdict came on the gray afternoon in late February. The courtroom felt smaller than before, though nothing about its size had changed. Perhaps it was because the months of testimony, evidence, and buried truths had compressed everything into a single, unbearable moment. I sat between Nathan and Camilla again, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Harold looked thinner, not just physically. Something inside him had hollowed out. The confidence that once filled every room he entered had disappeared, replaced by a rigid stillness that felt almost brittle. The judge's voice was calm and steady as he began reading. Guilty on multiple counts of financial fraud. Guilty on embezzlement. Guilty on unlawful control and concealment of inherited trust assets. Each word felt like a slow drumbeat. Final. Irreversible. Then came the charge connected to Amelia. Reckless endangerment resulting in death. Guilty. A sharp inhale moved through the courtroom. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not from relief, from something deeper. For 30 years, Amelia had existed only as a memory frozen in grief. Now her truth had been spoken aloud and validated. She had not simply vanished in an accident. She had been wronged. The judge continued outlining the sentence. A long-term federal prison term, asset seizure, mandatory restitution tied to misappropriated funds, and trust exploitation. Harold did not react outwardly, but I saw his jaw tighten. His hands trembled slightly against the table. For a man who had spent his life controlling every outcome, this was the one thing he could never manipulate. Consequences. As proceedings ended, the courtroom began to empty. Nathan sat beside me silently. After a moment, he spoke. I don't feel what I thought I would feel. His voice sounded hollow. I understood. Justice doesn't bring joy. It brings closure. And closure often arrives wrapped in grief. That's normal, I said softly. He nodded. I keep thinking about the father I believed he was, he whispered. I reached for his hand. You can mourn that version, I said gently. It existed for you, even if it wasn't the full truth. He swallowed, hard eyes shining. Thank you for not giving up on me. I squeezed his fingers. You're my son, I said simply. Across the aisle, Camilla stood alone for a moment, watching Harold as agents prepared to escort him away. Her expression was complex. Not love, not hatred, something closer to quiet liberation. She caught my eye and gave a small nod. We didn't need words. Both of us understood the strange mix of loss and freedom that comes after escaping long-term manipulation. As Harold was led past our row, he finally looked at me. For the first time in months, his gaze held something I had never seen before. Not anger, not superiority, something closer to emptiness, as if he had finally realized how thoroughly his choices had destroyed everything he once valued. He opened his mouth slightly, as if to speak, but no words came, and perhaps that was fitting, because some actions sever the right to explanation. The agents led him away, and just like that, the chapter of my life, defined by his presence, ended. I sat still for a moment after the courtroom emptied, letting the silence settle. For decades, my identity had been intertwined with Harold's. His wife, his partner, his supporter. Now, for the first time since my early 20s, I stood completely outside that shadow. The realization felt both frightening and deeply freeing. I exhaled slowly. I think I'm ready, I said quietly. Nathan looked at me. Ready for what? I smiled faintly. To begin again. Spring arrived in Charleston with the scent of jasmine. Soft white blossoms climbed along iron fences, and warm sunlight returned to the harbor after the long winter months. Life moved forward with quiet persistence, as it always does, no matter how deeply the past tries to anchor us. 6 months after the trial, I stood on the porch of a restored historic home overlooking the water. Not the mansion Harold once controlled. This home belonged to me alone, purchased with assets legally restored after the court's rulings. But more importantly, it represented something far greater than financial recovery. It represented independence. Inside, laughter echoed from the kitchen. Nathan was there helping Camilla assemble boxes of legal documents. They had begun working together to restructure the company into a transparent, ethical firm focused on community, risk support, and fraud prevention. Their partnership was not romantic. It was built on shared survival, shared understanding, shared determination to transform something damaged into something meaningful. Watching them rebuild, I felt a quiet pride. Not because everything had been repaired, some wounds never fully disappear, but because they had chosen growth instead of bitterness. And that choice matters more than perfection. I stepped off the porch and walked toward the waterfront path. The breeze carried salt air and distant sounds of gulls. For years, I had believed my life's value depended on holding my family together at any cost, on maintaining harmony even when it meant silencing my own intuition. Now I understood something profoundly different. Peace built on silence is not peace. It is simply postponed truth. And truth always finds a way to surface eventually. As I walked, I thought about Amelia, her laughter, her dreams, the life she never had the chance to live. For a long time, grief had defined my memories of her. Now, something else had joined that grief. Justice. And justice, even when delayed, carries a quiet healing power. It doesn't erase pain, but it restores balance. It reminds us that truth matters, that voices deserve to be heard, that actions have consequences. I stopped at the edge of the water and watched sunlight ripple across the surface. For the first time in decades, I felt completely present, not trapped in past betrayal, not consumed by anger, simply alive and open to whatever came next. Later that evening, I sat in my living room recording the story. Not as a confession, not as a warning, but as a reminder. Because there are countless women like me, women who spent decades supporting others, who endured manipulation quietly, who believed speaking up would destroy their families. If you are listening now, I want you to understand something. You are not weak for trusting. You are not foolish for loving. But you deserve truth, you deserve respect, and you deserve the courage to reclaim your life when those things are taken from you. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own strength, or helped you feel less alone, please take a moment to like this video. Share your thoughts in the comments, because your voice matters more than you know. And subscribe to this channel so we can continue sharing stories that remind us all of one powerful truth. Karma does not always arrive quickly, but when it comes, it arrives completely. And sometimes the greatest revenge is not destruction. It is survival. It is truth. And it is the quiet, unstoppable act of beginning again.